You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway Murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group, together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas. Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas.
And joining us today is a voice that will no doubt be familiar to those of you who live in the Hampton Roads area. We are joined by Andy Fox of WAVY News 10. Andy, thank you so much for joining us.
Kristin and Bill, great to be here.
Well, we're very excited. You are one of the journalists who've been handling this story, the Colonial Parkway Murders, for 30 years. You actually provide some degree of almost continuity in terms of the journalistic coverage of the story. These are some of the things that we'd love to get into with you on Mind Over Murder today. With that said, we'd like to just jump right in.
Well, I first came to WAVY TV in August of 1986. And then, of course, the terrible tragedy that unfolded in October, just a couple of months later, was really my first big story at WAVY TV 10. I got into it very aggressively covering it because it was so saddening. It was so awful because Rebecca was a student at William and Mary, and of course Kathy had such a distinguished career. And actually, Bill, I wouldn't meet you for many, many years.
Right,
during the initial
right.
stages of that, I didn't even meet you once.
No, we were not in Virginia. My family had never lived in Virginia. My brother traveled there to identify Kathy's body, but we didn't really completely engage on the Colonial Parkway Murders in terms of a local Virginia presence until 2009, when the story broke about the FBI losing control of the crime scene photos. And then we kind of engaged and met with the other families. So you and I didn't meet probably until late 2009, early 2010.
It was 2009, yes. I remember that period of time, too. I was intrigued by it and just was very aggressively covering it. I think probably more so than any of the other reporters, just because I just kept doing stories on it because there was just a lot of stuff going on. And there was a lot of unknowns and there was mystery involved. And I just, as a reporter, I just was always intrigued with things, with complicated stories. This was a very complicated story. I often say I'm not the house fire guy, that goes to the house fire and then, you have the house fire and you have the sound bites, you set the camera up and, it's that's it. There was a lot of moving parts to this. There was, and I remember we had absolutely no contact with the families because they were protected, by the College of William and Mary. I'd have to go back and maybe Rebecca's brother, maybe he was involved. Maybe we had interviewed him earlier on.
Yeah, Bob Dowski.
Robert. Maybe but I can't place it. It doesn't stand out to me.
Yeah, the Dowski family, Robert in the interviews traveled to Virginia and he did do some interviews during that time frame. Whereas my family, we stayed away. We were, going through our own process. Bob actually is the older brother of Becky, and he and my older brother, Richard, were the ones that actually traveled to Virginia to identify the bodies and so on, which is a horrible story in and of itself. Then Bob did some interviews, but Richard and my family, we made a decision that we were not going to participate in any media interviews. My family did one interview with our hometown newspaper, the Lowell, Massachusetts Sun, and that was the only interview my family did for 23 years about Kathy's death. The only public statements my family ever made. Now, in retrospect, I think that was a mistake because I think we ended up with a very cold case as a result, because I actually have said to many families over the years that it's actually quite important even though it's very difficult, I think families do need to engage and participate with the media, because otherwise terrible things happen every single week and you can watch your case go cold in front of you, sadly. I think Bob Dowski did interviews in the early stages of the Colonial Parkway murders, which wasn't even called that. Do you recall when they began calling these murders the Colonial Parkway murders? Because
I think from very earlier on, we were calling the Colonial Parkway murders, even in 86 and 87, I believe, because we had a plural of murders on the Colonial Parkway.
Okay.
And then we had David Knobling and Robin Edwards. And I think that, but it wasn't on the Parkway. And then when Keith Caw and Cassandra Haley happened, I think that we were all pretty much freaking out. I mean, weren't we? With those three? All three of those terrible, terrible crimes. And then I think it sucked. And then, of course, we had Anna Maria and Daniel and what happened to them in New Kent County, which really, I think, Bill, and Kristin, this is the first time I've really been with you. But Bill and I have talked many, many times about, whether the New Kent County, Anna Maria and Daniel is really part of the Colonial Parkway murders, because I think that there's a lot of question as to whether that's, and I think, Bill, you've expressed that it doesn't fit. What's the word you use? The sequence? Is that the word you use? The sequence. It's not part of the. What's that word you use, Bill?
Well, part of the series, I think. Well, I am now of the opinion, and I've learned a tremendous amount about the Colonial Parkway murders in the last 12 or so years. I'm fairly convinced that the Colonial Parkway murders are not a 1, 2, 3, 4 sequence of events. I think there are relationships between some of those murders, but I think that some of them may, as I put it, fall off the table when the ultimate story is told about what happened here with these murders. I don't think they're necessarily all related.
But then what that suggests, and I think I am willing to go along that they are related somehow.
I think some of them are and some of them are not. I think there's some independent events mixed in here.
There's only one way that I think the New Kent County incident can be part of this. Are you ready for this? This is going to sound weird. There's only one way.
Sure.
Okay.
That, and I referred to it in the show, is that this was a really evil, smart guy or guys who did this. And the only way that the New Kent County incident can be in the, what I call the arena of serial killing, okay, is if these killers had enough and they realized that they could go on and on and on and no one's ever going to catch them because they were too smart. And so they did this one, or he did this one last event with Anna Maria and Daniel. And they wanted to leave two messages. They want to leave two messages. The first one was, "You can't catch us," which was the roach clip on the car. Mm-hmm. Okay. The second one is of saying that we are done. And they treat the two bodies in New Kent County differently than they treat the others.
Agreed.
On a blanket, and I hate to use the word tenderness because there's nothing tender about what happened, but it was more of a signal sent. We're moving on. We're going to get our lives back. You aren't going to catch us, but this is the signal that we're sending you, that we are done. And they left the bodies, like the others were not left, on a blanket, on a logging road, and they finally said, "We are done." And then we never heard from them again. It's the only way New Kent County can figure into this. And you know what, Bill and Kristin, I didn't come up with that until I was watching the show.
Oh, that's interesting.
When I was watching the show and I said, how do we, and they made they kept talking about the blanket,
Right.
And I'll be honest with you, I know, of course, I covered it, and I was up there with the state guy, the state police guy. But it finally dawned on me, this is the only way. That was the sending of signals that we are done and you aren't going to catch us.
It's interesting.
It is interesting.
Some of the investigators, I don't necessarily buy your theory, but let me run with it for a second.
Can I say something real quick before you do that?
Sure.
The counter to what I said is, Andy, there's no way that someone who did this is suddenly going to stop. I get it. I know. But that's the only way I can include those two into the arena of serial killings.
Well, let me respond in two ways. The profilers that I've met with, and Kristin and I have had a chance to talk with some amazing people as a result of the Lover's Lane Murders series and the other work that we've done. Some of the profilers I have met with have said their views of serial killers have changed over the years. And they said the idea that a serial killer cannot or will not stop has been put aside because now they have a number of examples where, for a variety of different reasons, serial killers have stopped, sometimes for years, sometimes indefinitely. We did some episodes on the grim sleeper case in Los Angeles, where perhaps dozens of women were killed by a serial killer. And the reason they called the case the grim sleeper case is because it appeared he went to sleep. The murders stopped for sometimes years at a time and then started up again. There are a number of other cases. Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, stopped. And there are a variety of different reasons, and these are some of the new ones that profilers have mentioned to me. They said that people get married, believe it or not, or they're happy, they're in a relationship, they have other sexual outlets, in other words, positive ones that don't necessarily involve killing people. They age out of the demographic. A lot of serial killers are in their 20s and 30s, and as they get a bit older and they slow down a little bit, they're not so filled with testosterone and rage and all that unhealthy stuff. So they do seem to find examples of serial killers who have stopped. Some of the investigators had said to me regarding Phelps Lauer, number 4 at I-64, that there are aspects of it that have an air of finality to them. This idea with the two bodies laid out side by side and the blanket. And I think some of this made it into the show. Kristin, they talked about respectful, that there was some degree of the way the bodies were handled, and Andy's touching on that as well.
Yeah, the kind of tenderness aspect.
Yeah, the tenderness.
Yeah,
I hate to use that word.
It's a weird word to use. Now, Andy, you've been covering this case for so long at this point that I'm sure you probably feel like you've heard just about every theory out there. What are some of the more prevalent theories that you as a reporter have heard about who might be responsible for the Colonial Parkway murders? I'm sure you've heard just about all of them at some point.
Yeah, I think the Lover's Lane murders really paid a lot of attention to the moral killer, the moral killer, and Bill. And I'm sorry, Chris, and I refer to Bill because only because he and I've had such a history together.
Yeah, it's fine.
Years. But so great to be with you. Is that the moral aspect, that this was, some guy that had a moral problem. And of course, the show talked about all of them, beginning Bill with Kathy and the sexual relationship she had with a woman and being at the Naval Academy and all that. And you talked about that. And then, of course, Robin and David, there was an age issue there. There was a lot of stuff going on with that, the sneaking out after, they at night. Keith and Sandy, kind of that kind of isn't as crystal clear what the issue was there, nor with the Phelps Lauer, except there were, pot, the smoking of pot and all that.
Right.
And so I'm not sure and then of course we always had the theory that the park ranger was, may have been involved, a law enforcement type person that came along, which could be. And then Bill, you and I talked about a particular individual, who left the country, who may be somehow involved.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
So, I'm not. I think it was crimes of opportunity. And, Bill and I have talked a lot about how the park rangers really botched the Call Haley incident.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Can you imagine when they unloaded everything from Keith's car and took it back to the office, and then they're missing person. They realize that there's a missing person incident, and then all of a sudden they're panicking, and they have to race back, and they have to stage the scene and put everything back the way they thought that they found it.
Well, and as I understand it from talking to people that were there back then, and then that creates all kinds of friction between the FBI, if you are killed in a national park or go missing in a national park, they have jurisdiction. There's all this friction then built around Call Haley, which at that point is a disappearance. It's technically still a disappearance. And then there's all this really hard feeling because the FBI folks come in and they're like, this completely compromises our investigation. You've made a mess of the crime scene. And by removing the clothing, I'm not even sure I even get why the Rangers thought this was a smart idea. My recollection is that they identified whose car it was by going through Keith's wallet and Sandy's purse and so on. And my recollection is that they found Sandy's information, I think, in her checkbook in her purse. And they were looking through Keith's wallet to see if they could figure out who is the driver of this vehicle and so on. But the removal of the clothing, I've still, to this day, never heard an adequate explanation why National Park Service Rangers thought it was a smart idea to remove the clothing from Keith's Toyota Celica, which apparently infuriated the FBI and even made the FBI suspicious of the Rangers to start, which is not a great way to start a missing persons investigation.
And Irv Wells talks about that. The former special agent in charge, Irv Wells, had a lot of problems with it. And when I've interviewed him, he's mentioned that there was distrust, that there was not the sharing of information, that there was territorial stuff going on. And the fact is that the Rangers were not capable of conducting an investigation into something like this so complicated, that the FBI was not called immediately. I think, of course, this car was found on a Sunday, and I think that the FBI office in Norfolk wasn't putting two and two together as late as mid-morning on Monday.
I think you're correct. I've even heard one version of the story, and I can't say this is 100% accurate. I have one version of the story that has FBI agents hearing something on news radio in the car saying that a couple was missing, and people are like, has anybody thought about the fact that this is a mile and a half or so and about a year and a half before two women were found murdered at a very similar pullout along the Colonial Parkway, meaning Kathy and Becky? People just weren't making the connection initially between a missing couple, Keith and Sandy, and two murdered couples in the previous 18 months. And now, of course, hindsight's 20/20, but people are like, how could they not get how important some of this stuff could have been?
Unless they had some motive to do that, which has fostered and carried and continues the theory that somehow a park ranger was involved in this.
Well, how uncomfortable. You've got great sources in law enforcement circles, and you've known people. You've been covering the region for 30 years, Andy. How uncomfortable do law enforcement sources get when you're talking about the Colonial Parkway murders?
I've taken the FBI to the point. I took Irv Wells talking about the park rangers. He's gone as far as he can go on that and saying, you know what? They botched it, and we had a terrible relationship. And then Irv talks about how they went over to the hotel on the in Yorktown, okay, and they basically set up shop there. Remember, and they were kind of like using that as a headquarters to launch this investigation. Right. And they were all in a hotel over there in Yorktown.
Mm-hmm. The Duke of York, yeah.
Talking about Miss Mary's restaurant down there. And they, so yes, it was there. I'll be honest with you guys. I don't understand how, knowing everything that had happened just, a year and a half earlier, how these Rangers could have done anything but called the FBI and say, hey, listen, we've got a car and we can't we don't have an explanation on why the car would have been left here or why it was left in the condition it was. And this is a mile and a half from where we had the previous incident, Thomas and Dowski, and you need to get up here now. And this conversation takes place, should have, early Sunday morning.
Yeah, agreed. In talking to the Call and Haley families, and for instance, Terry Haley is a former cop herself. She was with the Newport News Police Department, if I'm not mistaken, for 5 years. She said that when she got up there, it was a complete mess and that no one was securing the crime scene. So even by the standards of 1988, which is very different than how things would be handled in 2021, but she said even by the standards of the day, she thought the place was a mess and that they didn't seem to have their act together.
And the car where was Keith Call? I go back and I look at the video and I've been trying to piece together when that car disappeared from where it was, because I know we were out there on Sunday morning and I was out of town and I was coming home and I got wind of this and I called the desk and I said, listen, we've got something going on. Even I, as a reporter driving home from being with my father up in Northern Virginia, called and said, this is the second incident on the Colonial Parkway and get up there. And they said, well, we're already on the way. We were already on the way to it. And I just don't understand under what circumstance the park rangers would have thought, like what you said, it was a good idea. And I'm telling you, they moved that car. And I don't know exactly when they did move that car. Do we know when they moved that car on Sunday morning? Because all of our video does not have Keith Carr's car in it. So, I'm talking about 12, 1, 2 p.m. That car is already gone.
We don't know. I know that ultimately Keith's car is towed and taken away. And then, of course, as we've talked about, Kristin and I, one of the things that's shocking, especially looking backward, is that the cars are ultimately returned to the families in 3 of the 4 examples. The only car that didn't come back was my sister Kathy's white Honda in incident number 1. That car was so badly damaged that it was scrapped. So we never saw that Honda again. But in the other examples, the cars are actually returned almost immediately to the families. I know that in incident number 2, David Nobling's Ford pickup truck is returned to his family almost immediately without even being processed as a potential crime scene. And you're like, what? Even by the standards of 1987, that doesn't seem like solid police work.
Well, in the Lover's Lane murders, you saw I did a stand-up with his truck in the Carl Nobling's driveway on Monday.
Right. And there's a situation where you're reporting and you have full access to the vehicle. It's already been moved. And there are these horror stories that surround the Colonial Parkway murders about all sorts of missed opportunities. The truck had never even been fingerprinted at that point. You look backwards.
That's correct. It had not. It was not fingerprinted until I think after I had done my stand-up at the truck. I think later on Monday, maybe later into Monday night, I think it was finally. And, I've always wished that I would have, said, hey, do you mind if I kind of look around in this pickup in the truck? Do you mind if I kind of look under the seats and, take a look at this? But I didn't do that. But I'm sure that Carl Nobling did.
You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after these messages.
Do you like our show, Mind Over Murder, and want to create your own podcast?
Well, then, let us tell you about Anchor.
First of all, it's free. And who doesn't love free, right?
I like free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer.
You can even add any song from Spotify directly to your episodes. The possibilities are endless for what you can create, whether it's music analysis, your own radio show, or something the world's never heard before.
Anchor will then distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more platforms.
And you can even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership.
I like the sound of that. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. Right here, Anchor.
Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started on your own podcast.
You can tell them Kristin and Bill from Mind Over Murder sent you. One of the most frequent questions we're asked here at Mind Over Murder is, how can I help?
Thanks to Othram, a leading forensic DNA testing lab for law enforcement, you can get involved and help solve real cases.
If you have tested at a consumer genetics company, you can contribute your data to DNAsolves.com. The process is easy and confidential. Just 2 simple steps. Your DNA might be the missing piece that helped solve the identity of an unknown person.
Then Mind Over Murder will highlight cases Othram is working on to seek your crowdfunding support for DNA testing to help solve these cold cases.
Upload your DNA profile to DNAsolves.com. It's easy, free, and confidential.
Then join Mind Over Murder as we help families find answers with Othram and DNAsolves.com.
Welcome back to Mind Over Murder. Tell us the story about what happened, if you would, in the Edwards Knobling case. Some of this is covered in the Lover's Lane murders, but tell us how they ended up finding out about the fact that David and Robin had been murdered inadvertently through reporting you were doing live. And tell us a little bit about the helicopter and that whole thing.
Yeah, I appreciate all that because, I had to go back and I had to reconstruct what happened. First of all, I feel terrible. I was watching the show and I was telling you, I really got the heebie-jeebies when I was watching the show and all of this was playing out in front of me. The emotion and David's brother. And it was very painful for me because I realized that my reporting caused a lot of hurt unintentionally. Okay. Because there were things going on that we could not, we had a job to do. And there were things that were going on that we could not ignore, first of all. And I'll tell you what happened there I always call him the guy in the red shirt, who was on the beach. Here's how I found out. So I had been and first of all, I was with Carl Knobling. Okay. So family did know the bodies were found. Carl Knobling knew.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And what happened would never have happened today. They would have had police officers with the families. We would have had cell phones. Remember, this is not cell phone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
And so in order for me to communicate with my station, I had to go up onto the main road and I had to go down and I know that, Bill, you know this, there's a convenience store down there. And when I'm at the convenience store to call on the payphone, my station to tell them, listen, this is what's going on. And I think we had a 2-way, but I didn't want the other stations to know that I was on a 2-way. We'd had 2-way radio, but those are monitored. Okay. And so I went to had a private conversation with my station about it because I didn't want them. We were the only ones out there at the time. And while I'm there, the guy in the red shirt says, hey, I was down at Ragged Island and I found 2 bodies. There are bodies on the beach. And I said, what?
Now, this is at the convenience store.
At the convenience store, I see the guy in the red. So the guy in the red and I come back to the beach and he's down on the beach. And of course, we were hooking up with Carl Knobling.
Right. Who was searching for his son.
Along
with other people from Isle of Wight Sheriff's Department and other law enforcement agencies that were there.
Right. And so we go down there and, we're walking down the beach and I had to go live. Okay. So I stopped and I had to go live and say, 2 bodies have been found. And I know that because Carl Knobling also confirmed for me. So I had the guy in the red and then I have Carl Knobling. And so that is at the point where I reveal that 2 bodies have been found. And in a later broadcast, it's confirmed to me through Carl that they were shot in the back of the head.
This is in an era when the news helicopter was fairly a new concept.
Chopper 10 was, I don't even think we called it that back then, but it was, and what I had remembered was that they had, and we're still trying to piece together whether the chopper either came up and went back or it was a live picture. I'm starting to think now that they went back and they put the video on air and I was talking over the video and I never saw the video. When you're doing a satellite shot like that, you don't have a monitor. We didn't have a monitor. So I wasn't looking at something. And then you can imagine how horrified I was when we had the bodies of David Knobling and Robin Edwards, and we had it in the chopper shot. And then, so all of this is going on. We see Carl in the show. Carl is, of course, very distraught, and they weren't going to let him go down there. And just to show you that the police had no control of the scene, Carl said, "Yes, I am. And you can just put a bullet in my back," or he says something to that effect.
Yeah, he does.
And he goes down there. The guy in the red goes down there. I start going down there, and then I'm tethered back because I have to go live at whatever time it was. And other people were down there, and there were a lot of people down there. And so all of this is happening, and I just felt terrible. And I know this is just audio, but I'm holding my head just even thinking about it. David's brother, and how deeply saddened he was, and how cathartic this whole thing was. And of course, the next day I go to interview Robin's mother. And of course, I feel terrible. I take flowers back. I take flowers to her because of the loss. I'd already interviewed her, and trying to just say how sorry I was about this. And of course, a lot of things are different. Cell phones, as we've said, we never would have put bodies on air like that. I don't even know. And I talk with people at my station. I said, what was that? And then at some point we stopped doing that. And, we do not even put the carrying of a body bag on camera anymore. We don't even do that anymore. The photographer's waiting for we call it the body shot. Okay. Because this is the only thing you can use because it's in a bag. The body's in a bag and moving. We don't even put that on air anymore.
The news,
when I was watching, real quick, when I was watching this, I was so saddened. I was so beside myself with just going, oh my gosh, because it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And the sadness that these people found out how they found out, and then they used my name, and I just felt so awful. And that I in my TV room, there's a sliding glass door, and we have curtains. I literally got up during the show and closed the curtains. I was getting the heebie-jeebies.
Wow.
I felt really freaked out when I was watching it. And if you've watched the show, you know what I'm talking about all of that, and just the sadness that I felt. And I just feel, I'm so sorry. I'm just trying to figure out what I would have, Bill and Kristin, what I would have done differently, because I have Carl there. I have Carl telling me what happened. I had the guy in the red. I don't have any interference from police telling me to leave. Okay. Or this is a crime scene, get back.
Yeah. The whole situation was completely out of control.
I don't believe that they were marched down the walkway. I don't think that happened. I think that they were taken straight line from where the truck was found straight down to the water's edge. That's what
I do too.
It's too far. Do you know how far that is?
Oh, it's probably a mile through if you actually follow the path through the marsh.
Yeah, I've gone down it. It's about a mile through the marsh. Yeah.
It's a long way, and there's no way that David and that's just a long way for the killer to be preoccupied with doing this. And there's too many on the killer's side, too many bad things that can happen of his being discovered in that period of time.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to march a young couple, even if you force them to take their shoes off, through a sometimes rocky, muddy path, through a beautiful but pitch black marsh for a mile or more, when it's a straight shot, probably no more than 200 yards from the parking area directly to the water. You're alongside the bridge, but one of the things the investigators have pointed out to me is people from the bridge can't see that area as they're driving, because people that are driving out of Newport News, their view of that area is blocked by the other side of the bridge. And people that are driving away from Isle of Wight and towards Newport News across this 4.5 mile long James River Bridge, they would have to crane their necks around over their right shoulder. Maybe someone in a passenger seat of a car, maybe if they turned all the way around, might see something briefly. You're probably going 50 miles an hour or more when you're driving across the bridge. Yeah. You're moving.
Yeah, I don't think you come up on it too quickly. I don't think it's possible. And first of all, and second of all, you aren't looking for it. I mean, you aren't.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, I think something. I wonder if something's going on down there.
And
it's too dark.
Exactly. you'd have to crane your neck at the right moment briefly. You'd only see it for a very short few seconds before you had traveled too far along the bridge. So I think logically it makes a lot more sense for whatever happened to David and Robin to have happened in that direct straight line to the water. I think they were marched to the water's edge and sadly shot, and their bodies were thrown in the water. I have no buy-in whatsoever that they were marched off that path through the marsh and the whole thing. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And one of the things investigators keep saying is go with the simplest explanation then, and that's probably the one that actually happened.
And to that point, Keith Conk and Cassandra Haley, I do not believe. And I know that, there's Irv Wells. I heard him. He thought they went swimming. I don't think they went swimming.
No.
Maybe one of the dogs picked up a scent, but I'm telling you, they would not have gone into the water. And Bill, as you and I have talked before, we now believe that the car was intercepted coming back from CNU, at the time Christopher Newport College, and they were intercepted somewhere, and they were under the control of someone else when they were intercepted. Maybe at a gas station. Maybe not.
Or maybe all the way back to the party. Something could have happened at the party at Christopher Newport University.
Yes.
At the parking area for the apartment complex where the party was going on. And apparently there were multiple apartments with, it was a bunch of kids and a keg and the whole thing. And something could have happened around behind the University Square apartments or something like that. The other thing that just doesn't work for me in Call Haley is the Colonial Parkway is 15 to 20 minutes beyond her parents' home in Grafton. Even if they did decide they wanted to be romantic, there are places they could have stopped to make out that didn't involve them driving 15 to 20 minutes out of the way.
Unless they wanted to go to the Colonial Parkway, and then that is the motive for them to go there. They did go past there, and they wanted to go to the Colonial Parkway. But remember, this was like a first date. Yeah. I'm not sure that happens on a first date. I think it's too much trouble.
And that's not your ideal spot for a makeout. That pull-in is very, very shallow. You're 50 feet from the road, maybe. If you want to be private, why would you go to that particular turnout? There are other ones.
Yeah, good point. And I just don't see on the first date they're doing that. But I will tell you that apparently the Colonial Parkway was a notorious place and people went there and it was a party place. And maybe they did go up there and they were going to meet other people up there, or there was going to be a small party going on. But we know that didn't happen because we don't have any of the people saying, oh, yeah, we were having a party up here. There was none of that going on.
No, and supposedly Keith and Sandy are seen at the party sometime around 1:30, and she has a 2 a.m. curfew. Some of this makes me smile when I think about, being a kid at that age. If he's supposedly working to get Sandy home for a 2 a.m. curfew, this doesn't make sense to leave Newport News at 1:30 when he's got to drive her home to the Grafton area and drop her off at her folks' house. The parkway is out of the way, and Keith's family says he was aware of the fact that Kathy and Becky had been murdered on the Colonial Parkway, and he wouldn't have gone there, and that her sisters said that Sandy didn't care for the parkway because it was pitch black out there. It just doesn't seem to make sense. And I've had some good first dates, but I don't think the parkway fits with their plan.
And, back in the day, we had Chris, the brother, coming back and saw the car. But and I know that Richard Call, the dad, we have half of the parents of these 8 victims half of them are dead.
Right.
Yeah. Half of them are alive, right? Didn't you give me that number? What is it?
Yes, I counted
8 and 8.
8 and 8. We've lost half the mothers and fathers.
So Richard Called, the dad, works up at Anheuser-Busch, and on Sunday morning he is driving up the parkway and sees the son's car and keeps going because he thinks, well, maybe his son is, doing whatever his son might be doing up there at that time. And he always regretted that he didn't stop.
Now, he says he slowed down or stopped briefly and didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Did
he get out of the car?
Well, I've heard different versions. He says he glanced in the back seat and saw nothing out of the ordinary. And if he had seen something out of the ordinary, he says, I never would have gone to work that morning. He continues on his way. He was even hypnotized, the Call family has told me, later to try to remember more detail. He went to his grave, and Mrs. Call, his wife, is also gone now. They were deeply troubled by this because he felt like he missed something important when he went by there. Now, his recollection is that he did look in the back seat. Remember, he hasn't built in any extra time, in my opinion. He is going to work, and he isn't planning on doing a search of his son's Toyota Celica found in an unusual spot. I think he stopped briefly, but he was very upset and blamed himself, as I understand it, for not taking a more careful look at his son's car parked in this unusual spot on the parkway.
And I think Chris had also seen the car earlier, and the talk of like a white van, seeing a white van, and came up on him behind him as he was coming down the parkway, and he kept driving.
I don't think the van is white, according to my recent conversations with Chris, but he did encounter a van driving erratically as they were heading back. And that was quite late. That was probably 3 or later. Chris is older, and he's out with a buddy, and they're coming back from hearing music or something. And the parkway is a way home to their home. You'd cross the bridge there and head over into Gloucester, where their family's from. The parkway is a road that they would have used regularly. Chris said he saw this odd van speeding and then turning around in one of the half-moon turnoffs along the Colonial Parkway. He made note of it because he thought their driving was very erratic.
So we look at so many things in at least the Call, Haley, and Nobbling Edwards, so many what ifs, stopping, checking it out. What if you hadn't snuck out at night? That kind of stuff. There was just a lot of what ifs. And I was, Bill, tell us about, and you now believe this, that perhaps Kathy knew her killer.
I do. I think that it's quite likely. I believe that Kathy's naval service directly ties into her murder. I believe that there is a strong possibility that Kathy may have known their killer. Now, that might mean then that Kathy and Becky's murder might not be related to the other Colonial Parkway murders, but I can't say that for sure. It does appear that their killer or killers did take extraordinary measures. That's the only one of the 4 double homicides where the perpetrator, the offender, goes to such great lengths to get rid of the car and destroy the evidence. The attempt to set the car on fire with diesel fuel, which has always struck me as very odd, as well as the final attempt, it appears, to push Kathy's Honda Civic into the York River. And of course, that does buy them time for perhaps as many as 3 days where the car goes undiscovered. They may be just getting lucky there, but they've seriously made attempts to hide evidence in Kathy and Becky's murder, which they don't really go to those lengths in the other 3 double homicides.
And then also in the show, Lover's Lane Murders, there is the talk of the evolution of efficiency, if you will, in the killer's deadly deeds, how they became smarter, because that was a lot of work. What happened with your sister, Bill, and with Becky, that was a lot of work.
A tremendous amount
of all of these, that the work that was done in this and on so many levels was just, certainly, if you want to build the case that this is a serial killing, it does fit into that because this was too much work, and it became a lot easier as he went along.
Right.
You agree?
And too much.
It got better. Yeah.
And too much time as well. I mean, one of the things that's very striking, it's pretty clear that Kathy and Becky were not killed at the Cheatham Annex Overlook because, as Kristin said a minute ago about the York River Overlook where Keith's Toyota was found, these overlooks are incredibly close to the road surface of the Colonial Parkway. Andy, when you interviewed me a couple of years ago out at the Colonial Parkway, one of the things I did when I was waiting, when they were setting up, I was sitting there thinking about what I wanted to talk with you about, but I also did something that afternoon when I was doing those media interviews. I timed repeatedly how long it took between the time I heard a car coming in the distance on that kind of rough surface of the Colonial Parkway and the car appeared on scene where where Kathy's car was found. And it was 10 to 15 seconds. It was never any less than 10 seconds, and it was never any longer than 15 seconds between the time I heard the car in the distance, and you're driving about, I would say, 45 miles an hour typically.
Yep.
I don't know what the speed limit is, but that's how
it's
fast.
45.
Okay. So people
45.
drive 45-ish, sometimes faster, on the parkway. But it's 10 to 15 seconds between the time you hear a car coming and the car appears in the clearing where those half-moon pull-offs are located. So what I'm saying is, I don't care who you are. If you're going through this elaborate ritual of killing someone in a little pull-off that's, as Kristin said, no more than 50 feet from the surface of the road, so they are going to see you in 10 to 15 seconds. There's no way Kathy and Becky were killed at that location. I think they were killed at the Ringfield Plantation picnic area, which is about a mile away and is much more private and secluded off the Colonial Parkway. It's been closed for years, but it was open back then.
What was this? The
Ringfield Plantation picnic area, which was closed.
Ringfield, right. That's up above Ringfield. Yeah, the picnic area.
Yeah,
yes.
Above Fellgates Creek.
Above Fellgates Creek, exactly.
Yep.
That very private picnic area, which has been closed for years, and the National Park Service said publicly they were closing that area due to problems with gay cruising. I don't think this has anything to do with Kathy and Becky's murder, but the road, which I've walked, even though it's closed, it's probably a mile or longer paved looping road through the woods. It's absolutely beautiful. The structures are still there. There's restrooms and there are benches for picnic areas and places to grill and all that sort of thing. Apparently, it was incredibly popular during the day because it was so pretty. Families would go there for cookouts and that kind of thing. At night, though, it had a very different complexion. There was a lot of gay cruising going on in this extremely private area, which, by the way, has only one way in and one way out. It's a big, giant loop. If you wanted privacy, that was a place on the Colonial Parkway. It's no longer available to the public, but back then it was. Kathy loved the water, and this has beautiful views of the York River, and you can see all the way to the Cheatham-Annex Naval Facility. You can see naval ships being loaded in the distance. And that seems very likely a place where a couple like Kathy and Becky, if they went to listen to music and make out or whatever, that seems like a much more likely spot than the little Cheatham-Annex overlook right next to the Colonial Parkway.
That's really interesting. I need to go up and take a look. I think that I've been up there, but I need to go up and revisit that part of it because I always believed they were stopped close to where the car was found. I've just always thought that. And I absolutely believe that the two parkway situations are related. I do believe that. I do believe that either with Keith Cole and Cassandra Haley there and they were approached, or they were somewhere else and the car was put there, and the person who did it was very familiar with what happened earlier with Kathy and Becky. And that's the reason why they left the car there.
Join us again next time on Mind Over Murder as we continue our conversation with reporter Andy Fox of WAVY News 10. If the Colonial Parkway murders are related, why do the crime scenes feel so different? And why haven't the FBI and the Virginia State Police been able to unlock this puzzle for more than 30 years? Join us again next time on Mind Over Murder.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawl Space Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening. to Mind Over Murder.